Ladies, on March 27th at the Golden Gate Club in San Francisco, I invite you to join a room of trailblazers, executives, entrepreneurs, and visionaries who are rewriting the rules of money. Hear from real women who've built wealth through real estate investments, scaling businesses, and creative financial strategies. And learn from industry leaders who have walked the path you're on and who are ready to share their playbooks. You'll engage in intimate panels, fireside conversations, and curated peer-to-peer matchmaking designed to spark meaningful connections. Leave with our wealth creation toolkit packed with actionable resources to help you prioritize your goals and take immediate steps towards financial independence. Now, your journey doesn't end when the day is over. Each of you will be invited to join our online Catalyst community, where you'll be guided through more educational opportunities and times to be able to connect with each other over the course of the next few months. Wealth creation is about opportunity and community. The Women in Wealth Catalyst Summit, ladies. It's time to redefine wealth and redefine your future.
Welcome to Getting Rich Together, the show for successful women who are looking to take their financial futures to the next level. I'm your host, Shama Bunton. When I started my wealth building journey, nobody knocked on my door to give me all the answers. So I want to talk to the experts who've done it and bring the answers to you so we can discover the right opportunities that will help us achieve the financial futures we've always dreamed of together and have fun doing it. So let's dive into this episode and start getting rich together.
I am here with the incredible Madeline Darcy. Madeline, you are not just an award winner and who's happened to hit all sorts of top VC lists and, women to look out for, women who are really changing the world of venture. You're also someone who is extremely generous with your time, your spirit, and the work that you're doing to help evangelize women getting rich, I think is quite impressive. I am so excited to have you here today on Getting Rich Together. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled.
Fantastic. So, Madeline, let's get started. Before you were on the top lists of the who's who and who's making waves, there was once a very young Madeline who was at one point 5, 6, and 7 years old, and she was growing up and experiencing the world for the first time. Madeline, tell me, what was the world like for you growing up? What did you see about money? What did it feel like? What did it look like?
Absolutely. I mean, so different. And 6-year-old Madeline would never understand the world that current Madeline lives in. And I think that's important to understand from just a growth story, right? Of you can start from anywhere, right? And I think that is so important to note in a world of believing that we can grow and get places. 6-year-old Madeline would have been back in Australia. My dad actually lived with an Indigenous tribe in Australia, which is very off the beaten path. Everything from living in an old combi van to living in an abandoned train. We had no electricity. We had an outhouse. Honestly, I think 6-year-old Madeline was just like praying for mosquito repellent and not wanting to have to go to the bathroom outside late at night. But in terms of money stories, it's interesting because having grown up in that environment and specifically living amongst an Indigenous community, you do start to see the pictures of the haves and the have-nots, and you do start to see the power of resources, right? And specifically financial resources, and what that can mean in your ability to push forward the vision that you would like to see, to push forward the communities that you are a part of. And I think that was a true signal to me of, if I want to be able to make a change, I have to find a way to shift resources and into communities that I know, truthfully, need more from an education standpoint, as well as more of an entrepreneurial and business-minded standpoint. And so growing up, we didn't have a lot. Like my earliest memories, we used to have a saving program that you would come to school and put a couple of dollars in every week to an envelope. I remember when I was probably a couple of years older than that, my dad took it and we bought groceries with it because we didn't have grocery money. And it's like, my time, that's kind of traumatic to be all of this money that I saved is now just going to a grocery bill. But the other part of me reflecting back is also my dad didn't have a lot, but it was very symbolic of this abundance mindset he had, which was easy come, easy go. And I try to think about that as I think about money mindsets. It's not actually always about how much you have, but it's about how you feel about it and how you feel about money coming back, right? And the ability to produce more in the future. And that's really stuck and resonated with me. So 6-year-old Madeline had no idea what the world of finance looks like and to be a part of it, but was certainly having an eye towards how she would be making money and the power that that would have.
It's incredible. And so as you were sort of going through high school, were you one who took up a job on the weekends? Were you immersed in your studies? Did you have an idea at that young age that you would go on to lead a career in such the way that you have?
I mean, all of the above. I was back in Australia. The legal working age was at the time, it probably still is, 14 to 9 months. So when I was about 14 and a half, I was shopping my resume around because truthfully, I needed money. I'd been babysitting since I was 12. Certainly every side hustle, anything I could sell, I would absolutely probably try to sell. But when I could legally get a job out in the workforce was just before I was 15. And I got my first job at McDonald's. I think my first check was $6.38 per hour. And every time we had a school break or a holiday, I would pick up more hours. And it was very unglamorous. I got burnt by the fryer one. I had really hideous steel-capped boots because you never know what heavy thing you would drop on you. But it's funny because though in that world, one, I was very curious and academically driven. I've always been really just motivated to learn and grow in that way. So I always did well in school. But working was so important to me because I wanted my own money. I wanted to control my own future. And I knew that meant going and getting a job. My parents certainly weren't going to hand it to me. They didn't know that even if they wanted to, they weren't in that position. That was kind of the best step into the working world. And interestingly, as I think about those experiences back when I was in high school and even through college, truthfully, my motivation was I have to make money to be able to afford anything. But it ended up being a really good springboard for my career because by the time that I was in college, I had worked for McDonald's, I'd worked for Apple, I had worked for Disney. And I had always just seen those as jobs and not necessarily as a springboard to a career. But I really credit those with helping me get my first job out of college. And truthfully, even when I went to business school, it was often those experiences where I was on the front line that I went back to because you learn a lot about business from the way that your front line is treated and the way that those individuals interact with people in a broader organization, perhaps even more so than when you're looking at leadership just from the top.
Wow, that's so powerful. What fantastic learnings from this very early stage. I also feel like for our listeners who have children in high school, right, where it's I feel like often now it's the way our children are being brought up or differently than the way we were, right? It's now the options are to get a job because you want to be strategic, but even these jobs that are very frontline jobs can really help you understand and see things in a really nuanced way, which I think is so valuable. So that first job at McDonald's, you're getting your first paycheck. Obviously, the world has now opened up in a different way, right? Capital in your hands and seeing a direct correlation between your labor and some money now means that you can do a lot of things. So what do you remember were your earliest things that you would want to spend money on when you were in high school? Was it saving money? Was it, all right, girlfriends, it's time to go shopping and have dinner? What was it like for you as you started to earn the money?
I mean, I was such a saver. And this is so funny of me, but I would count it every few weeks, right? In the world of which I was getting pocket money. And then as I got my own bank account, I really enjoyed seeing it grow and truthfully seeing that hard work does pay off and you can grow that capital over time. To fast forward, I bought my first car at the end of working those jobs for a while, which was great in high school to have my own car and take myself from A to B. It was a really beat up old car, but I loved it. You could hear everything on the road from inside, but it was mine, right? And I earned it. And I loved that lesson, right? That you can do things for yourself, right? Because I think that is it's the most empowered place to be when you actually feel like you have autonomy and control over your own outcomes. And it's not necessarily reliant on so-and-so promoting you, so-and-so giving you something, right? You're no, I can do this. If I go and do it, the results pay off. And I think that was a great reinforcement to have when I was young. So the answer is twofold. I both saved it for a long time and then spent it on a big purchase.
I love that. That's so fascinating. And so as you were getting ready to enter university, clearly very driven, calculated in terms of, seemingly so, in terms of your trajectory. How did you land on your subjects of study? And were you thinking about the financial, let's say, rewards and payoff at the end of that degree? Or what part of it was for the love of your study?
Yeah. So interestingly, this is where I feel like I wish I would have had more business folks in our network and in our environment. I actually studied psychology. I'm actually really glad I did. But I had no idea that people studied finance or studied, like in Australia, we called it commerce. I was like, commerce doesn't sound particularly interesting to study. It was just because I didn't know. My mum had studied psychology and become a teacher. I was like, oh, I don't really want to become a teacher, but maybe there's something else that I can do there. But truthfully, just took it again from the love of learning, the love of understanding people. And really, I think I learned more from the people around me as I got into university. So I actually started school in Australia because it was free. And that meant a lot when I was at that age. And then ended up coming back to the US, which is a funny story. I was an exchange student who never went home. So I was supposed to be at UT Austin for a semester, ended up graduating from there about 2 years later. I packed up my tour in Australia quite late. And all my friends had joked. They're like, you're going to go to America and you're not going to come back. And I'm like, that's nonsense. I'm a 1-semester exchange student. You can't possibly do that. And then I found a way to do that, apparently. So I ended up in the US. And again, I was lucky. I'm a dual citizen. My family grew up bouncing back and forth a bit. But I was 19. I had no healthcare. I had no credit score. I had gotten at least admitted to UT Austin. So I wasn't going home to Australia. But I had to figure things out. So during the time that I was applying to transfer, because mind you, I actually hadn't gotten in when I decided to stay in the US. I went and took a 6-month kind of internship and job over at Disney. So I was in Anaheim working in the stores. If you have ever, and folks in the audience have ever been to Disneyland, like I was working in the stores, like back in Critter Country with like the big puffy sleeves and the apron. It was not glamorous at all. I was like stuffing plushies into shelves at 3 a.m., walking back through the park. But college me learned a lot from, again, like those experiences. College me then, when I went back to UT, despite staying as a psychology major, I joined every undergrad business club there was.
Wow.
I joined the university security and investment team. I joined the Women in Business Club. I think by the end of it, all my peers thought that I was a business major and I wasn't. I just surrounded myself with them. But like loved it. I like found myself like stock pitch competitions. Because I was working, I had Apple, interestingly, at that time gave those that were campus reps and interns 401ks. So I had a 401k. I was investing in my IRA. I was starting to learn about index funds. I opened a Vanguard account.
How old are you, Madeline? This is wild. And how old were you when you opened up your Vanguard account?
Like 19, maybe 20 years old. And again, like great learnings. And I'm lucky because it was, again, things I would talk to peers about. I was lucky I had a professor that taught like an intro to accounting course that I signed up because I thought it would be interesting and fun, which I know no like teenager or college student usually says about accounting. But I was like, oh, really interesting, should learn this. And I'm so grateful. She spent a single lecture talking about like personal finance. She was like, I think this is important for people to know. I think it's rare because I understand that most do not learn this in university or college in their studies. But she explained, she's like, this is how personal finance works. Like, these are retirement accounts. These are brokerage accounts. Like, this is a Roth versus traditional. And it was a single class, but it meant so much to just getting me curious and going down the rabbit hole. And I will say the other helpful thing is like, I just thought everyone knew. I was like, here I am, grew up on an island. Apparently everyone in the US understands the complexity that is US healthcare. They understand their retirement planning. I just felt I was far behind. So I came and I was like, okay, I've got a lot of catching up to do. Better figure out retirement, my healthcare, this financial system. So I just went deep, and then I got into my first job in consulting. Everyone around me was a finance major, and they were coming to me asking, what am I investing my retirement accounts in? I was like, wait, you guys all majored in finance. I'm the liberal arts kid that got into this path that I shouldn't be in. And Patrice, like, well, part of it was like, I just thought everyone already knew, and I was the only one who didn't yet. And so I just self-studied my way there.
Oh my gosh, you really just highlight something that I think is so powerful, which is, a lot of people, when they come to the US, they know more about how the country works. They know more about the political systems. They know more about, let's say, entrepreneurship than many people who are born here, because there is just not the fire or this feeling of needing to learn. And so obviously, if I were to pick up and move to another country, I would spend a lot of time trying to figure out how all the systems come together. And meanwhile, here you are thinking everyone else knows so much, and you are excelling across every single mark when it comes to investing in oneself. It is extremely impressive, Madeline.
Thank you. I mean, it's lessons learned too. Like, I still remember this, and I won't name the phone company. I remember how mad I was that I couldn't get, in the US, you have to sign up for a phone plan, right? To get a mobile phone or a cell phone. And I had to pay $500 as a deposit, which was a lot of money for me at that time, in order to get a phone plan. Like, literally, in order to pay them money on a subscription, I had to put in a deposit because I had no credit score. And again, like, learning these things, I was like, ooh, like, these are the things that I'm like really motivated.
That's for you.
Yeah, start to understand, all right? Because it's a tough system to figure out. And I realized that. And I had a lot of advantages in many ways. But I think it's just important to underscore when people feel like they don't get it. That's a common experience.
Yes.
And to make sure that, again, I think this was the point of your podcast too, like, we all learn together, and hopefully, right, you get past those points. Because again, I'm at least lucky to be in a world at that age where I could have my own bank account as a woman. My grandmother actually had come here from Australia when she was similarly in her early 20s. She couldn't open her own bank account. She couldn't get a loan for her business. She and my grandfather divorced before I was even around. But again, it just makes you think how far we come in a short amount of time, but also in a really optimistic way, how much further we can go in the next 10 to 20 years, given how short a lot of these financial histories are.
Absolutely. And so looking at sort of your first job post-university, obviously now you are fully launched into the world, right? You're now managing far more complicated finances than before. How did you start to look at your initial salary? Did you negotiate when you got your first job? Did you, look at sort of 360-degree compensation packages? Obviously, ahead of the curve and understanding how to manage your resources from a personal investing standpoint, but what was it like kind of getting into the workforce and starting to receive some real capital?
And for context, I made more in my first job as a management consultant than my parents ever did. And it really made me think. And again, it wasn't a great deal of money, but I was like, my parents supported a full family of children and themselves on what I am making right out of college. And again, I think that was a lesson to me of paying it forward and frankly, continue to work hard. But I give that context because truthfully, like, so many people have that similar experience. And we don't often talk about it because people don't like to say things like that necessarily out loud. But again, it gave me a real responsibility of like, what am I going to do and how am I going to pay forward? In the decision, it was really interesting because at my consulting firm, and this is quite standard, you essentially all get leveled and all get paid the same. So I think I probably tried to negotiate, but actually in a way that probably was really advantageous to me and others. They were like, you all get paid the same, and actually you all get paid the same across the country and you all get the same signing bonus. So what I did with that information is I was like, okay, well, if I live in Texas, then my apartment will be probably half the price and I don't pay state income tax. So I went to an office where I could frankly like save more. That's amazing. It's quite funny because my husband and I, he and I met working at the same consulting firm. He was living in New York and I was living in Dallas. And it's funny to compare actually, like when you think about we made the same, but then you take taxes out and you take out your living expenses. And actually like, it's not always about how much you make. It's about how much you save, how much you invest. And that was really helpful to me because I was probably putting away close to 20% a year of my salary in investment accounts and in savings. And so that, again, I'm grateful for the ability to have done that because it allowed me to take more risks later in my career. It allowed me to take the time to go to business school and not be paid for 2 years, to do entrepreneurial things like I'm doing now. But essentially going into my first bank experience, I was like, again, I've seen what my money can do earlier on already in compounding in terms of return rates or interest rates. I know what I can do in essentially setting myself up for retirement or setting myself up for life if I save, if I invest. And at the same time, I was actually really fortunate. There's a gentleman who I'm still so close to, who was a ex-partner of the consulting firm that I worked at and managed a lot of the equities, a lot of the capital of the partners of the firms of money. And one of the partners introduced us and was like, I'm like, by the way, I have like no money. And he largely handles like high net worth clients. But this partner essentially said, Madeline is like a real hustler. She's very intellectually curious. Like, you should just meet. She's talking about these things all day to be on a weekend. He and I like worked with him since I was probably like 20 years old, also a little bit older, investing in public markets. But also, again, like a really helpful sounding board as it relates to different accounts. Like I've been investing in a Roth IRA. When I made too much money to do a Roth, I would do a traditional and do the backdoor conversion. And if you do that every year for decades, that really starts to move the needle.
Yeah.
Truthfully, like continue to do what I did when I was young. I continue to invest. If I learned that it is still sitting there compounding, did not go out and buy another car, but I still have the same car from 2012.
So amazing, Madeline. So, as far as the transition and deciding to go from consulting into venture, what was that process like? Obviously, there is so much more risk, and from someone who sounds like a methodical saver, someone who's strategic, this is a lot of risk for someone who is sort of oriented towards, all right, I'm going to take this amount, 20%, let's create the strategic, logical plan. Tell me a little bit about the emotional, mental, and financial decisions that went into this incremental risk you were taking with your career.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is absolutely true. And then I also look back and I realized I moved to this country without actually knowing anyone or actually even being enrolled in a school. So strangely, I have been both like deeply strategic and a pretty strong risk taker for a while, which is an interesting contrast to live within one person. But in terms of truthfully, it was a big one. Like even I went to Harvard for business school, and even going somewhere like Harvard, my family members were like, you have a good job where you make money. Why are you going back to school? They're like, are they firing you? Like, is there some reason you have to leave your job? I was like, no, like, it's actually like a very well-respected thing to do to go to places for business school. Like, and it was just, again, really different mindsets. But I was fortunate to go. I was fortunate to be offered sponsorship by my firm, which in risk-taking moves, I actually turned down to go work at a first-time fund. So they essentially offered to pay for my tuition. I said, no, thank you. I'm going to go take a big high risk and probably get a lower salary. But the reason that I did that is a fewfold. I think at that point, and for those in the audience who are at that age, like I am very fortunate to have had the chance to go to business school. One, because of the network and the education, but two, frankly, for the pause and the reflection. I had been probably working like 80-hour weeks up to that point, and my life was very centered around my job, my career, right? And that was the first time that I really took a step back in a while and thought, well, why am I here? What is the difference that I'm going to make in this world? And given the background that I came from, truthfully, there's always been part of me that is like, why am I here? I have no business being here. Someone who grew up the way I did statistically ought not to be here. And for me, again, like that's when a lot of the stats were showing this gap in terms of funding and entrepreneurship, whether it was for women, people of color, really any community that wasn't part of wealth, right? And given that I had spent a lot of my time at that up to that range, making sure that I was at the top of my class, making sure that I went to good schools, making sure that I got into a great firm, making sure that I was a good analyst at that firm, I was really in the position to say, oh gosh, Mad, like you've brand stamped a lot. Like, what are you going to do outside of the brands of your resume? And again, like it's always been in me. Like I volunteered all throughout college. A lot of the opportunities actually came through the work that I did more in like the nonprofit and give back spheres. But that was something that was always deep within me. And it's like, I didn't want to wait till I was 80 years old and then like donate some money to an organization I cared about. I wanted to be more integrated in terms of my purpose as well as my skill set. That was a little bit of the journey for me, figuring out this world of venture. And interestingly, a man in venture capital back in Austin, where I had gone to undergrad despite the fact that I did not start there and weaseled my way in as a transfer student, he actually worked in venture capital. And I knew him because he was on the board of this amazing nonprofit called Subiendo, which works with students from the Rio Grande Valley, largely Hispanic students, who were looking at opportunities in higher education. So in truth, I was like a summer camp counselor, but met him through doing this nonprofit work and through doing, again, these scrappy summer jobs during school. And he contacted me and we got back in touch as I was going to business school. And he said, you seem to be incredibly intellectually curious and you're always writing about companies that are much smaller than the clients that you consult for. Have you ever thought about venture? And that led to my first internship in the world of venture, understanding the language, getting my foot in the door.
What was it like? Like, what was the environment like for you when you first stepped in, and how different was it from now your business school experience, from, looking at the world from these more, let's call them traditional lenses? What did you start to realize about this really true now wild, wild west?
Oh, exactly that. I mean, I went from working with companies that were probably 50 billion plus in revenue to companies that had no revenue. I was like, oh, can we value these on a multiple of EBITDA? Because like they would owe me money if it's on a negative EBITDA. Like that would be great. It's a really different way of thinking, right? Instead of thinking about large companies and incremental opportunities, you're thinking about, frankly, to some stage, ideas and like what the world will look like in 10 to 20 years, not what your balance sheet will look like in 2 to 3 years, or not what the market will think about this decision next quarter. So it really, it lengthened my timeline and perspective, and it broadened my viewpoint in terms of, again, like what business can do for the world in like a very broad stance. And I know that sounds a bit grandiose, but truthfully, like the impact of venture is incredible. It's like 0.2% of GDP that drives 21% of it. It's crazy what venture does in terms of economic growth, in terms of employment, in terms of innovation. Venture drives like over 80% of R&D in the country. And to me, what an incredible place to be, where you can drive change in that way and bring it all the way back to like early childhood stories of growing up in, I would say, communities that had less. Resources make a big difference, and being part and being at that table where resources are invested, I knew could make a big difference too. So in short, I left a world with a lot of structure and maybe salary, a very deliberate path from like consultant through partner. And truthfully, I was like the odd one. I wrote my business school essay saying that I was going to go back to consulting and like be a partner and do what? Like a year later, I was like, all of you wrote your essay saying that you're going to go do entrepreneurial things. And then you went back to your firm sponsor. And I was like, how do I keep doing all this wrong, team? But to answer your question, was essentially like a lot less structure, which was really fun for me, because coming from a background where I had built a lot of processes and structure, I was like, oh, like that's a value add that I can give to this world. I may know very little at this point about like the mechanics of venture investing. I know I can learn it. And by the way, I can also put some structure and processes in a world which is pretty ambiguous in about every single way.
And did you, as you entered into this first sort of foray into it, were you risk averse with your own capital? Were you excited to sort of start to leverage your own capital? How much time did you spend in the learning phase? And then when did you start to deploy yourself?
Yeah. I mean, so for context, I was an institutional investor able to deploy other people's money before I was personally an accredited investor and able to deploy my own money, right? Which is this like broader context for those that are listeners. You have to be an accredited investor to deploy your own capital in private market. So I was I was helping make decisions on behalf of the firm I worked at, but they were actually personally being wealthy enough to write my own checks in private markets. So that is the context. So like my mindset was very much like working at the firm and like being able to interact with these entrepreneurs. Absolutely. You're like, I don't agree with that decision. This is how I would place this investment. This is what I would wish to do. And so working that environment does start to get you thinking like, if this were purely my decision, what decision would I make and how would I allocate? Probably a year or so, or maybe two into working into venture, I actually had enough money to be accredited and started investing into really like ideas that were perhaps like off thesis for the firm that I believed in. It was often friends, people that I knew well. And truthfully, like I will say I probably sized my checks too highly at first because I did not think, and again, even as someone who worked in venture, I did not think well enough about like diversifying my angel portfolio. And so like that's one piece of advice that I often give is like, think about the total that you're going to invest in this asset class, if it's venture, in the next 3 to 5 years, and like divide that by 20, or like divide that by like 20 by more 30 even, to make sure that you have enough exposure across companies. Because unfortunately, that's a mistake that I see with so many angel investors, right? Or family offices. They do like 3 venture deals that are way too large. They all go to zero and they're like, this is a terrible asset class. Like, I'm never doing this again. But it's because you really need to be diversified in an asset class like venture. To really answer that, it was very much seeing it through my job and then actually being able to do it as an individual. And really, again, being an individual investor as an angel is really different than being in a firm. Because
how did it feel?
Yeah. And it felt great, right? When you were in the position of check writing power, like you get to make decisions and like you get to feel like a really big part of others' journeys. And it was so wonderful to see founders that I cared about that were building things and be able to say, I want to write you a check, right? Like I essentially want to give you my money and then help you for free in addition to giving you my money, right? It's a wonderful position to be in if you can give back in that way. And for those that are in the position to give back in that way, it's an amazing thing to do for the entrepreneurial community. So again, like absolutely scary, because every single one of those checks I wrote knowing that it may never come back. And certainly it is very illiquid still. Some of those are probably like 5 years old, and I probably won't see that still for another 5 years. So you have to have a lot of patience. Whereas my public markets portfolio is completely liquid. And there is definitely days where I look at the return rate on my public portfolio and it's fully liquid. And I'm like, wow, venture is tough. Like, return rates, yeah, obviously higher, but completely illiquid, right? And who knows what happens in the future. So again, like I would say, I feel very privileged to be able to invest in asset classes like venture and to have that exposure, but also will out loud say, make sure you're investing in your retirement accounts, make sure that you have money in the market, make sure that, again, you are not only invested in one high risk asset class where you are not diversified. You absolutely can build wealth that way if you get lucky, but statistically you will not.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to underscore, especially as we have all of this, exposure now with deregulation and just lots of opportunity, right? And now we have so many more, which is incredible, conversations around investing, but not as much of the risk management or conversations are really helping people time out their investments and realize sort of also different stages of deals. Everyone, when they talk about investing, sometimes they're really just focused on the pre-seed investment, but there are so many other stages and ways to get involved in these private companies that I don't necessarily think there's a lot of conversation around, and it still remains to be somewhat of a black box. So tell me, Madeline, what were the dominoes that fell for you to launch and really become activated with Kaya Ventures? Like, how did you start to realize that you had the experience from working with these other institutions? You probably saw a ton of wins and losses to be able to understand risk tolerance, if you will, and what the upside was. But again, you're moving to increasingly more risky endeavors as you decide to launch and really fly and spread your wings. Tell me what it was like to get this started and how do you feel?
Yeah. In the feeling, like I feel incredibly lucky to do what I do. It's truthfully to be in the position, regardless of what industry and professionally, to be doing something that is deeply meaningful, that is important for the world and the broader picture of things, and something that truthfully like you enjoy on the day to day and like you get to really like flex your like intellectual muscle then is amazing. How I got there and truthfully like what prompted it is when you were investing, you really do start to think about what is the thesis of my firm? Like, what do I like about it? Like, what fits my thesis? What doesn't? And over time, like you do acquire your own beliefs, right? Of what you see as the big opportunities. And for me, I had spent a lot of time investing in consumer tech, health, wellness, those areas. And time I would see so many deals that were just like a little bit too healthcare or like a little bit too X, right? And didn't fit our fund's models. And some of those I ended up doing personally because I was like, oh, like this is a no for my firm, but like if it isn't a conflict, like I would love to write a personal check. And that really starts to build this portfolio. It starts to build this muscle. It starts to build your own thesis. And when I left my last firm, I truthfully, I thought I would go to another fund. And I was asking founders that I knew from over the years. I was like, this is the thesis I really care about. I'm like, I have 2 criteria. I want to work with people who are kind and who are smart. I'm like, not all, and, not all. And they're like, I really don't have a lot of names for you. I was like, why? It's so hard. I was like, this is such an obvious thesis in my mind. Like, why aren't more people doing this? And truthfully, I had a couple of great founder friends who were like, Mads, like, you've always pushed us to like really go for it and to build where we see companies that need to be built. They're like, we need more venture capitalists that look like you, that think like you, that are building firms in these spaces. Of all people, like, you've been part of now 2 emerging firms, and like, you've seen funds get built, you've seen funds get deployed. Like, why wouldn't you go do this? And truthfully, it was probably the kick that I needed, because I was kind of searching for what it was out there and realized that this was something incredible that I could build. So that honestly was a lot of the push. And around the tailwinds, right? We're investing, for those that aren't aware, for Kaya, we're largely investing in areas like women's health, like the care economy. These areas where truthfully, I thought in 2024, everyone would have already figured everything out. Like my adult years, like surely we figured out things like childcare, the care of older adults. We figured out how to integrate women's health in the healthcare system. The truth is we've done really little. Women weren't back in clinical trials until the early 90s. As you look even in this big wave we're having now in women in sports, women are only represented in about 10% of exercise studies. Women aren't small men. I know, big shocker, but we present differently, right? When it even comes to things like cardiac health, we have a larger chance of having things like Alzheimer's, like autoimmune disease. It's actually not just the fact that we have babies or we menstruate, right? There's a lot more to women's health than the things that I think are really apparent to people. And so that, to me, again, it's like, how do you bring different perspectives? And how do you bring a little bit of contrarian thinking, as funny as that sounds, into this world where you know that there is a lot of upside from investing in areas that haven't been historically invested in? And so that's how we got there. And that's what gets me really excited, because truthfully, there's a lot to do in the areas that we invest in, and the spaces that I have a lot of fun in.
Oh, it's so amazing, Madeline. And so as you are now in what might call the high risk, high reward early part of your life, because there's a high risk and then high reward opportunities. How do you sort of manage that more interpersonally? You know, obviously, while you're out there deploying checks, meeting with founders, fundraising, you know, it's sort of moving through this cycle from an external standpoint. There's obviously where you are personally investing, how you're sort of looking at managing, you know, your day to day. You know, obviously with the world of venture, it is a long tail game. So how have you started to sort of think about, you know, organizing your own sequencing? What does that look like?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you asked, because truthfully, I feel like everyone who's an entrepreneur is really good about saying everything is amazing all the time. It's not. Everyone knows, like, the entrepreneurial journey is full of ups and downs and points. And there are days where absolutely it feels like you are doing the best thing in the world and like you are on cloud 9. And like the next day you may get like 7 no's from investors and like everything seems like it's falling apart in the market. And like I have those days too, for sure. In terms of where I am and how I think about it, and perhaps like the advice that I also give to others, because truthfully, I think that's barometer for the advice I give myself, is I'm in a time in my life where truthfully, like we don't own a house. Ergo, I don't have a mortgage. I don't have debt. I have retirement accounts. If I am going to take some big risk in my career, it's now. And I think about that because truthfully, if I think about my upside and my downside, as you said, absolutely high risk, high reward. If Kaya goes extremely well, in 10, 20 years, I will have built a firm that is so meaningful to these spaces and has generated a lot of wealth for our LPs and obviously those that work in our firm too. And then my downside, I'm like, okay, if everything goes wrong and the market is terrible and like just everything goes wrong, I'm like, okay, I'll probably get another job. And my next job probably looks like the job I had before, which is actually a pretty decent job. And I'm like, if my downside is like the status quo, I'm like, why not? Right? And so to me, again, it's like back to your point on like the duality that is like my logic and my risk taking. It really is that. I'm like, if that is essentially the decision tree, that is a pretty easy answer for me. And so that's how I think about it and how I might encourage others with kind of weighing the risk. Then again, I say that with like the context of we don't have debt, we don't own a house, I don't have these like major expenses. And like I've invested a lot of my personal wealth into building this firm, into the investments that make up my track record. And I also see that, right? I was like, that can all go to zero and my retirement accounts will still be fine, right? There is a floor there that has been created, but also it could go incredibly well. And that could be generational wealth, even if it were made by investments. So again, it's this constant thinking about like, actually, like, what are those probabilities? Where are those payoffs? I recently got to meet a woman named Jenny Just, who's built this incredible company in the poker space. And she said something that I have really come to appreciate in kind of linking poker and life. But we were asking her about risk taking, this exact question. And what she said it was, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's not about just taking bigger risks, right? You swing for the fences. It's about taking smaller risks more often and like building that muscle. And truthfully, I feel like that's how I ended up here, right? I just kept taking risks. They kept paying off. When they didn't pay off, I still learned something and I kept going.
That's so amazing, Madeline. I love your spirit. You know, there's a really beautiful spirit that is shining. I mean, when I think about some of my favorite languaging around an ideal life is about becoming self-actualized. And this idea of just truly being in alignment with purpose. And when we are, all the doors open, right? It's like there's flow, there are synchronicities and things that happen that we cannot explain. And often when we are making decisions and living, as my therapist would say, on the bleeding edge of life, it's there's a joy that takes over us. And so it's clear to see how purpose-driven and in alignment with your work you are. And that is beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So looking forward, right? I mean, obviously, with all of the longevity studies and everything that's happening from a scientific standpoint, I would dare to say that you might have another 100 years left to live. And looking at what your legacy might look like, and certainly sometimes hard to tell, right? I'm sure if I talk to you another 25 years, you might be like, Shama, I think I have a new vision for my legacy because I've already accomplished everything I wanted to for the first legacy. But let's talk about the first legacy. What is it that you're looking to create with impact in this world?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, it's been incredibly consistent throughout my life. I want more people to live well, right? And part of that is investing in themselves, investing their capital, starting earlier, right? And I think that educational piece and that inclusivity into ecosystems, like I would love to see more women, just like more people in general, in careers like venture, like private equity, in careers where they can build substantial wealth, who look different, who think different, who come from different backgrounds. Because I think our financial markets, I think our businesses will benefit from it. I think we'll all benefit from it. So that's a big part of it. In small ways, I feel like I get to live that every day. And I feel like I've been able to be part of that since I was young. And then like personally, truthfully, it's like what so many women want. I want a portfolio of cash flowing assets that for me, right? And compounds. And so I think that's the fun thing. Like I very much see myself as an early inning and like looking forward, like there's so much outside of what I do currently that I hope I get to be exposed to. Like my husband makes fun of me, but I'm like, I would love to do real estate. Like I would love to buy some small businesses. Like there is so much fun to be had in the world of investing. And again, we have so much time.
Wow, I love that, Madeline. I'm curious, what do your family say about what you do now? When you talk to your family, are they like, wow, our little girl who we once were taking around to all these incredible Indigenous communities, and now she is running with life in this like beautiful, strong, blazing trajectory. What is their experience of who you are today?
I mean, it's so funny because truthfully, I don't think my family understand what I do. Like what I do. I truthfully would say like they just want me to be happy. I think they are both incredibly proud when they see what I've achieved, and that makes them very happy to see. But I think truthfully, like I remember so many times I've described to like my mom or my parents what I do, and they're like, that sounds incredibly risky. Like, couldn't you do something like marketing, or like, couldn't you have a job like you kind of had before where it would be a lot safer and you may not be exposed to so much risk? I'm really transparent. I think absolutely they're proud of me and want me to be happy. But I also don't think they understand what I do, which is fair. It's a really confusing asset class. And it goes to show if my own parents don't understand what you're just spending, no wonder so many others don't. So that's the funny thing about it is I'm in a place that, again, I don't think a younger me would have ever thought I'd be. Certainly not one that my parents had exposure to. Yeah. I'm really glad to hopefully pay it forward and make that different to those that come behind me, right? I want 13 children. I really hope that my younger siblings have opportunities that are at least as good, if not better, than those that I've had. And I hope that's what it looks like for others too.
Oh, I love that, Madeline. I have two final questions for you. One is, obviously, you're a great saver. You've diversified your investments. You are doing great on those fronts. But one of the fun things I think about money is also how we choose to spend it and the things that bring us joy, experiences, items. Are there purchases or things that you've spent your money on that have brought you a lot of joy? And if so, what are they?
It's so joyful and abundant. I mean, I think one that's going to be quite funny is literally buying a nice matcha from a good coffee shop. And I live in LA, so that's a good $7 plus a tip. You're getting into a $10 drink. A younger me never would have spent money about that. I would be get the hot water from the tap and make your own tea. And you cut that Subway sandwich in 4 pieces and that's what you eat for the day. I stretch $1 so far. It's a very abundant, amazing world where truthfully, and again, Sally Krawcheck, the founder of Ellevest, is so good about this. It's women are trained to punish themselves for a latte. You can afford a $10 splurge. I promise you can. And you earned that. So that's one. And then I would say the second is being able to gift people things. I love the fact that I can go buy that fun set of cupcakes or whatever that gift that is just I thought of you on this trip. I love being able to do that. It's really special, whether it's for a family member, a friend, your partner. That gives me a lot of joy too. It's not completely altruistic. I certainly get joy from that. And then it's experiences, right? It's getting to go places that are really off the beaten path that you get to learn and explore in. I was really lucky in a very short story to do a semester at sea when I was in college. I got a full scholarship, which is a story for another day. I was really good at applying for money, but I got to see the world that way. And now I get to see the world staying at slightly nicer hotels than I did when I was 18 and had no money, but also a quite joyful experience.
Oh, it's amazing. And then my final question, Madeline, as a community, we are certainly here to evangelize and rally around the people who we love and respect and whose missions we want to carry forward. What are your asks right now? What do you need? What are you calling in? How can we support you?
Thank you. I mean, I would always be delighted to connect with women who are interested in being LPs, whether to my fund or truthfully, whether to others. I know so many other great women fund managers specifically that are raising. My ask and desire is just go learn, go talk to others about money, talk to them about what you make, talk to them about where you invest, go talk to men too, men, women, everyone, because the more that we talk about these things, the better that we'll all be for it and the more we'll all move forward together. So I really appreciate what you do with this podcast. It's a big part of that.
Thank you, Madeline. Thank you for being here today. I'm so grateful to have you.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Getting Rich Together. Please take a minute to subscribe. And if you like this episode, I'd love it if you could share it with a friend who is ready to elevate their financial future. Until next time, let's keep getting rich together.